Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Yeah, reluctantly. Reluctant. In a total Monday morning funk. God. Anyway, there's blue sky, sun shining, temperatures getting more comfortable, and here we are. Still living our lives. Excuse me while I try to talk myself into, not standing on a ledge somewhere. God, jeez. I told myself I was doing fine all last week. I did. And then I would get I got an email from a friend saying, "Oh God, what a week! I've broken down in tears a few times. I can't believe it." And I'm thinking, "Geez, I haven't done that." And I realized that I'm living my life with this my hand out, in hand out, not in wanting to greet somebody, but my hand out as if to stop, my hand out defensively, um not quite not quite taking in even what I'm taking in, just this remove. And then I realized it this morning when I woke up and thought, oh boy, got a show to do. And I started reading. And for some reason, everything I was reading was hitting me, directly. My defenses were down. And then after I finished and then tried to get organized for the show today and looked at what I had gathered over the weekend, as I do, in my reading and stuff, I saw that there was next to nothing there. And it's, I have this paltry little, and what there is there, guys, is just awful. The one thing I was actually looking forward to sharing with you, I can't find. And it was, as is so often the case with me, an obituary. And it was an obituary of somebody. Oh, here it is. Oh my God. I found it. Thank God. Okay, so as usual, there is an obituary that somehow makes me, well, it too has all its listen, there's no getting away from it. Humans. We're capable of wondrous things. We're capable of kindness. We're capable of creating art. And we are capable of the most extreme cruelty and destruction. And unfortunately, it is that those negatives that seem to be at the fore, at least in terms of governance, of where countries are going, at least ours certainly now. I read one thing today, and I know so many of you just don't want to hear any of this anymore, but at some point, guys, we do have to shake ourselves out. You see the speed and the no holds barred nature with which the new administration has come out of the starting gate. I mean, they'd come out of the starting gate before they were even sworn in. And the amount of destruction, which is what they excel at, and it is what drew so many people to them. They promised destruction. They promised cruelty. And for a candidate that was known for his inability to tell the truth, that is one truth that he told. He was pretty clear about his intent if he were to be elected. And if he equivocated sometimes, there were those in his orbit who did not, like the people who penned the Project 2025 screed handbook, which is now, you can see, being implemented. Okay, let me go to this piece that I read, because it it unfortunately I think explains things a little bit. It doesn't help in that what it's doing is describing what has become of so many of our friends and neighbors and family members, how they have succumbed to being part of this destruction and this cruelty, and how certain they seem. And then the other part of it, that so many of them see themselves as Christian. So many of the Christian churches have been overwhelmed by this, taken in as well, become party to. And the piece, and some of you may have seen it as well, but I want to share it because it gives, again, historical context and shows that what we are living in right now is not new, might be new to us, but it is something that has been inhabited and experienced by others. And that, for me, is the reason that we should be all the more ashamed, because we have history to look at and to see where this kind of cruelty and destruction leads. This is a piece by David French in the New York Times. And he starts with one of the Christian ministers who is all the rage right now. And something he said. Here it is. When you worship power, compassion and mercy look like sins. Now, I'm not sure, I might be wrong about this particular minister coming from their side as opposed to our side of the political aisle, because you could imagine, why would a minister ever say such a thing if he was on the power worshiping side? But he could have said it in explanation, because the people now in power in our country, they have a triumvirate of power. They control all three branches of our government, the governments of a majority of the states. They control huge swaths of our media and information gathering. They are aided and abetted by our corporate powers. And they have created a frightening, I would suggest, frightening cohesion of power in a country in which power is supposed to be shared, balanced. So to us, this kind of power is decidedly un-American. But the cruelty, which I often talk about, of these people is the thing that I've always been so stunned by, that anyone would embrace such cruelty. But if you think compassion and mercy seem to be sinful because they get in the way of power, well, then you're not going to be terribly troubled. And David French, seeing that quote, said it brought back this question that he and I and so many of us have wrestled with. How is it that so many Americans, even people we might love, who we might know to be in their lives otherwise good people, how is it that so many Americans seem to have abandoned any commitment to personal virtue, at least in their political lives? As I'm saying, we all probably know somebody who votes for Trump, who still does good work, might volunteer at a food bank, might do all kinds of, be a wonderful neighbor and friend, be the kind of person you'd want on your side, and the kind of person you know might be on your side if push came to shove, but not if it were political. And so many people like that, as well as others, have embraced what French calls this merciless political combat that Trump and his coterie evince. And then he introduces us, David French, to a German political theorist who I never had heard of, but who was there when Adolf Hitler came to power and who joined with Hitler. His name is Carl Schmitt. And Carl Schmitt would completely understand that quote that we started with. When you worship power, compassion and mercy look like sins. Here's some more of what Schmitt wrote. And we're doing this history to see how much this at least seems to mirror what we are now seeing in our own country, in our own communities, in our own families, in our own reality. Let us assume, Schmitt wrote, that in the realm of morality, the final distinctions are between good and evil. In aesthetics, they're between beautiful and ugly. In economics, the final distinctions are profitable or unprofitable. But politics, he said, politics has its own ultimate distinction. And the specific political distinction to which political actions can be reduced is that between friend and enemy. And Schmitt went on to say liberalism doesn't get this. One of the great deficiencies of liberalism, he said, is a reluctance to draw the friend or enemy distinction. And failing to do so can make liberalism weak. Because Schmitt argued an enduring political community can exist only when it draws this clear distinction, this binary distinction, like profitable, unprofitable, ugly, beautiful, friend, enemy. It is this contrast with the outsider, with those who are not the friend, that creates the community. Now, he's absolutely right. That is totally incompatible with a liberal or pluralistic point of view, which, of course, is a point of view that, as Americans, we thought was the American point of view. Pluralism, a nation of immigrants, building community out of all different kinds of people, compromise, living in peace with those with whom we don't necessarily agree with. This is the whole liberal project. We thought, most of us, I suspect, the American project, which is why so much that is happening now seems so terrifyingly un-American and so destructive of everything most of us had loved about our country. The pluralism that you and I embrace requires the law and ethics and our morality to coexist, to be as one. And without ethics, our law cannot stand. You know, I'm sorry, this is going to sound like a digression, but it isn't. I have often taken issue with that line in our foundational document about the pursuit of happiness, because I thought that there is no way the founders meant happiness like we do. And I'm right about that. We think anything that makes us happy, that's what we get to do. We're Americans. That anything so frivolous would be something that these serious men would have put into our most foundational document. And French points out that Ben Franklin, for example, when he spoke of the pursuit of happiness, he wasn't talking about what Americans now mostly think of as happiness, which would be what? Here's what Americans have been reduced to: pleasure, entertainment, and money. Pleasure and wealth. Because unfortunately, those are the two things that I think our culture has come to worship. Ben Franklin and the other guys, they weren't thinking of that when they said the pursuit of happiness. They were talking about the pursuit of virtue. They were talking about being good rather than feeling good. You've heard virtue is its own reward? They were talking about that. Free to be virtuous, free to be industrious and seek justice, to be sincere and humble, kind, all of those things. And that the person who pursued the virtues would be a happy person. The virtues that Franklin was thinking of are ethics, really. They are universal, this is French speaking now, they are universal moral obligations that apply to our treatment of everybody. If a country agrees to demonstrate those kinds of virtues, then your so-called enemies can live with dignity and freedom even when they lose a political battle. And when your enemies show those same virtues, you can enjoy a good life even when you lose. That is the social compact of the American ideal of pluralism. In a decent society, no defeat is ultimate, no victory is ultimate, and in all circumstances, your fundamental human rights must be preserved. You can see the distinct contrast with the Nazi philosopher Schmitt's friend-enemy politics. And it is the friend-enemy politics that have triumphed now, in this moment. And we are seeing them, that kind of politics, be implemented in all of its vengeful, ugly, ham-fisted, jack-booted cruelty. And one more thing. In this way of looking at politics as friend or enemy, you're either with us or you are against us. The most important virtue is loyalty. Unquestioning loyalty. It is secondary to ideology, which is why Trump so hates conservatives, Republicans who still adhere to this idea of a more virtuous live and let live politics. So Trump pardons would-be murderers, insurrectionists, because they evidence the most important virtue, loyalty. And he pulls security protection from other far-right conservatives who had served him, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, because they dared to say no at some point. Friends with this crowd can get away with violent crimes. Anyone who criticizes Trump are enemies, and they pay a price. Even their lives doesn't matter. And then French ends with this, and it's just so right on the money. Because our civics depends on our ethics, at least that's the way it used to be, because our civics, as we envisioned them, depends on our ethics, we should be teaching both alongside each other. Of course, that can't happen. The Department of Education will not exist, and anything that will be taught will certainly not be the ethics we would want taught. Instead, as French says, we are failing at both teaching civics and ethics, and our baser nature is telling millions of Americans that cruelty is good if it helps us win, and kindness is evil because it weakens our cause. And of course, we know that that is a path toward destruction. As the prophet Isaiah, he says, said, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." French ends thusly. Woe to them, yes. But as friend-enemy politics dominates us, tears our families and communities to shreds, and reshapes our national morality, a darker thought crosses my mind. Woe to us all. Yeah, that. So, um, that is where we are. I think I think that really is a good summation of what has happened, and it doesn't answer though to me how so many are willing to embrace, and not just embrace this ugliness, but since just in the last week, seeing how many so quickly acquiesce. There is ample reason for many people in this country at this moment to be terrified. It's some of the people that the bishop who begged Trump to show mercy listed. But others have less reason personally to be fearful. I don't think that I am in imminent danger of being rousted from my bed or my home, handcuffed, jailed, sent packing. Not yet. But many are. And they are people we know. They are people we work with. They are people who work for us. They are people we attend church with. And it's happening. And it's early, but if we don't start seeing resistance by those who are not personally affected, then folks, we are going down. We've seen a few examples of courage. We need more. I got into a screaming fight with a friend the other night. Was talking to he was talking to his sister, who is a federal employee with one of the agencies that has been taken over, and which will be gutted. And after his call, he said how she is now telling people to be careful of what they put in emails to her, of not writing certain things that show where their political points of view are, and I went ballistic. Um, I said, so this is the kind of thing that we cannot do. That's falling in step. That kind of fear is falling in step. This is now if the sister were a young person just starting out, I mean, she's older, she was planning on retirement anyway, So I don't see how, others I can see, let's just be careful. I want to try to keep my head down and keep my job. But you see, as a child, I remember asking my dad, how did that happen? Germany. How did it happen? Couldn't comprehend it. And you see, it's in the fear and little acquiescences, the little changes in how we operate, the furtive becoming even without noticing, becoming more furtive and watchful and quiet. And inasmuch as we do that, we aid and abet the destruction of this great experiment called the United States. I saw a quote by somebody who was talking about all of this stuff, that has happened in the last week, the firing of the inspectors general, the pardoning of these sons of bitches, the total destruction of any outreach to marginalized people in the government, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And someone uh, observing it all said this, and this quote hit me. Some of these efforts, obviously, are going to be turned back by the courts. And obviously, we could go off, yeah, they will, and then a lot of them will make their way to the Supreme Court, which will put them right back in, most of them. But yes, some of these just blatantly unconstitutional, un-American actions that this guy has been gleefully signing will be turned back by the courts. But this observer says, but the level of anticipatory obedience we're seeing. I love that phrase. Anticipatory obedience. Those are the scared folks. Those are the ones who are changing their behavior. They're, before anything has happened directly to them, they acquiesce. This person is seeing a level of anticipatory obedience from the business community, from the academic community, from media. And that person said it is unlike anything I have ever seen in my lifetime. And it is 1 week in. You don't need no jackboots knocking on people's doors if the people inside those places are doing what you want them to do just because they're scared. They don't want any trouble. They're getting in line. We've seen it with the tech bros, but see, they're part of the power. They have reason. They are going to be richer and richer and richer. I saw that all three, Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Musk, are all expected in the next few years to become trillionaires. The concentration of wealth and power and the cowardice of so many so-called leaders in corporate America, in academic America, in the media world, and others, is sickening. Anticipatory obedience. I saw this kind of thing happen in media in the course of my working in TV and radio. In when Reagan came in, and that drumbeat of the liberal media really started up. I mean, it had been there, but boy, liberal media, liberal media, liberal media. We see where that it begot this right-wing media atmosphere we have now. So, as working in the liberal media, working at broadcast network affiliates in television, I saw how just here and there, it wasn't like a memo went out. Here and there were just little, again, that both sidesism really got tough. So you had to be real careful. Well, we don't want to say that. You wouldn't say that. You would say this. And it was a kind of showing these critics, these powerful critics, that no, we're not so liberal. Look, we've got all these conservative points of view and voices that we're airing, and we bent over backwards. It wasn't asked of us, but it was an anticipatory obedience. And we had another term for it. What was it? Oh, I remember. We called it self-censorship. It was, oh, da, 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 I wouldn't say that. So we knew what not to say, because it could bring trouble from an advertiser, trouble from a powerful person, trouble where they could say, look, exhibit A, look at this. So when these people who worship power come in, and they often get to their power through fear and division, one should not be surprised when they continue to wield those two cudgels, fear and division, to keep people unsettled and frightened and acquiescent and self-censoring. But that ain't going to help, and none of that is going to help the country survive. Thinking of that old Union song, which side are you on? Which side are you on? I think, well, I don't know. You know what? Um, Let me just do my obit because let me do my obit because you know what? This is a profile in courage from a earlier part of American history that many of us lived through. Uh, it is the obituary of a man named Thomas Gaither. He lived to be 86 years old. I must say I did not know his name, and I did not know of his bravery and of the consequence of his actions, many of them taken when he was a very young man. But Thomas Gaither died at the age of 86 at his home north of Pittsburgh. And all the more reason for us to have known of him. Some of us remember watching on the news the bravery of young Black people. It was the year like 1960, late 50s, 1960-ish, sitting at lunch counters in dime stores in the South where they were not permitted to sit because those were only places that white people could sit and be served. And I don't know if your memory tells you that that was a successful protest movement. Or did it take, how many sit-ins like that did it take? Did the first one, caused a hell of a splash, got a lot of coverage. These brave young people were assaulted, were dragged off to jail, posted bond. And this went on. They were usually charged with trespassing. And so they paid $100 trespassing fine. Although if they didn't have the 100, they could serve 30 days on a chain gang. And they paid the $100. There was enough organization that they had the money to pay. These sit-ins at segregated lunch counters went on for over a year and nothing much happened. Nothing much happened because you know what happens in this country? The local news said, oh, another sit-in? Didn't even cover them. The national news didn't cover them. Sort of like, almost where school shootings have gotten. You just don't bother. It's just something that is. And so the momentum to draw attention to the plight of Black Americans in the segregated South was, it just wasn't happening. It was Thomas Gaither who changed it, who got the momentum back. He was 22 years old. It was 1961. He was an organizer working for CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And he organized a sit-in at a counter with a bunch of young Black men, none of whom had ever done any such thing before. But they'd all agreed to do one thing with him. And that was when they were assaulted by the cops and pulled off and taken to jail, they didn't pay their way out. They served a sentence on a chain gang. And it was that act that got people's attention again. the fact that these young men put their bodies on the line and were willing to go to jail and do the hard labor on a chain gang, that then got the media's attention again. Several months later, he and another organizer got themselves stranded on the New Jersey Turnpike in a snowstorm. They were heading to Corps' offices in New York City. And because they got stuck, they ended up reading a biography. So he's 22 years old. They end up reading a biography of Mahatma Gandhi. And they read it, and then they started tossing around ideas to use that kind of nonviolent resistance to keep the momentum that they had gotten going again, a spark again, with having served their time. They came up with an idea, and it was the idea that became the first freedom ride. They came up with an idea. Let's get an integrated group, black and white, who would be willing to take a bus trip from Washington through the South to dramatize the horrors that will inevitably befall them, and to show that Southern states were not complying with all the Supreme Court rulings. They didn't even bother. The Supreme Court would rule and they'd say, meh, rulings about segregated interstate busing, all this kind of thing. That's what they intended to do. And when they finally got to the meeting, they talked to the head of Corps, a guy named James Farmer, told them about this idea they had, and he said, whoa, that is incredible. So in May, a few months later, James Farmer led the first Freedom Ride with 13 white and black passengers, including the future Congressman and civil rights hero John Lewis. We know now that they were arrested, they were beaten by white mobs, the buses they rode were firebombed, the police abetted and joined in the violence, and hospitals refused to treat the victims. The national publicity obviously exploded, drew more activists. There were dozens more freedom rides. All the violence that ensued shocked the nation. And all of this because Thomas Gaither had a few hours stranded on the New Jersey Turnpike and was thinking. He never became a famous civil rights person. He lived, as we said, a long life. His obit says in 1962, after the sit-ins and the freedom rides passed into history, he entered graduate school. He earned a master's in biology and a PhD in botany, and he became a professor of biology in 1968 at Slippery Rock University, where he taught for 38 years. And I don't know if the people at Slippery Rock, did they know what he'd done? Huh. Thomas Gaither, 86. The historian Taylor Branch, in his, I believe it won a Pulitzer Prize book, Parting the Waters, uh, said that Gaither's choice of jail was an emotional breakthrough for the civil rights movement because it dramatized protesters' willingness to pay a real price for their convictions. Thomas Gaither, biology professor. And, no doubt, a man whose courage uh, should be an emblem, a lodestar to us now, living in a time of what will be, I can't even imagine, unimaginable repression and cruelty, and an attempt to roll back so many of the gains of the movement that he was such a consequential part of. Um, I was, for instance, just one of the things that all of Trump's uh, actions this week, he summarily, there's so much that, again, it's called flooding the zone. You just make people feel paralyzed, and our side is real good at getting paralyzed, really good at it. Um, the Justice Department, this is now Trump's, the Justice Department, Thursday evening summarily informed all the senior officials in all of the divisions of the department that oversee civil rights and environmental enforcement. Those are the two that he's really going after, rolling back. He informed all those senior officials, the ones who run and help run civil rights and environmental enforcement, that they are all being transferred to a newly created office in which their job will be to take action against sanctuary cities. Can you imagine? The idea, of course, is that they'll quit. For people who have spent their careers ensuring that civil rights laws and environmental laws were followed, to now be told that their job will be to pester and obstruct any jurisdictions that show any sympathy to people who are being rounded up shackled, and thrown out of the country. Obviously, this is just one, it's just one little one I saw, and I thought, oh boy, this is happening, all over our government. And its intent is clear, and it is to cripple the enforcement of laws that so many people, like the man whose obituary I just read, were willing to risk their lives to have passed. It also, doing this, is taking out the senior people. He's taken out the heads of all of these departments. It takes the key parts, key human parts of these departments, and says to them, here, you can come and do this, which you will find something we're pretty sure you'd be unwilling or extremely unhappy to do. So they're running out the people who have expertise. They are filling them with people who have the one virtue that is most valued by them: loyalty. It's why you have a total incompetence now heading our entire national security apparatus. Our total national security apparatus, from the National Security Council to the Defense Department, to the FBI, to the CIA, to Homeland Security, and on, nothing but expertise tossed and loyalty and incompetence ascendant. And I also want to point out just this, because it's stuck in my craw, and then I gotta go. Our Senator, John Fetterman, voted, I'm not sure how many of these people he has voted in favor of, but I know he voted for the loathsome and absolutely incompetent Kristi Noem for Director of Homeland Security. Fetterman, watch him. He is positioning himself to be the Democrats' Trump, the outsider, chaos agent, not sure what he's going to do next. That's what he's doing. Just watch him. Watch him. It could be we don't have, you got David McCormick as one of your senators, and you got a total loose cannon with serious ambitions as the other. I'm sorry. Amen. Don't shoot the messenger. Glad you could be here with me, and I'll be back tomorrow. My sister in tow, I think.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.